Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Tab for a Cause. You know, Young Sheldon is over, and I'm a little sad about it. Now that's pretty goofy, considering I was never really invested in this show. I've probably seen 10 or so episodes through its long 7-season run, and most of them I thought were serviceable, maybe even better than expected from a Big Bang Theory prequel, but, you know, nothing all that special. It seemed like a sturdy and reliable family sitcom. But that's not nothing, especially these days where it's become increasingly rare. Though I will say I tend to gravitate more towards workplace sitcoms. Still, the end of Young Sheldon feels pretty notable to me, because that show, whatever else you can say about it, was a hit by basically every possible metric. It did great for CBS, Netflix just did one of their big 6-month data dump things recently, and Young Sheldon was one of the few sitcoms that really lit up the charts there. It was, in many ways, the last big hit live-action American network sitcom. Now, this doesn't mean there's none on anymore, or even that there's none worth watching. I think they're in pretty dire straits at the moment, but you still have a show like Abbott Elementary being consistently enjoyable on ABC. Still, when you look at that Netflix data, it's hard to escape the feeling that sitcoms just aren't connecting with audiences like they used to, and I think that's worth talking about. So I will cop to the fact that I tend to criticize streaming services in a lot of videos like this, and I'm sure we'll get there in this one too, but as much as I love many of the classic sitcoms, and I have a fondness for the format itself, I should probably acknowledge a criticism that I see crop up in the comments whenever I talk about this. The fact that a lot of younger people just find sitcoms really, really lame. I'm not gonna lie, it always bums me out to read that, but I also understand. Despite the fact that we're talking about the genre that gave us incredibly clever shows like Arrested Development and Community, that is not what most people think of when they're talking about sitcoms. Just looking at what's on the networks now, something like the Night Court revival on NBC is clearly not meant to appeal to younger people basically at all. This leads to a lot of shows that probably don't do much for you. Like most network television, the target demo now is mostly people over 50. And for many genres, that's okay, because you have streamers, cable channels, and even online media kind of making up a lot of the slack. With sitcoms though, I think that's happening far less. Original TV dramas are heavily represented on streaming, often with big, lavish budgets. Then there's reality TV, where a big hit is reliably huge across all demographics, and which are usually very cheap to make compared to anything scripted. They usually don't use union labor, and just generally no one seems to care if they're obviously super fake, contain a ton of bad acting, and are edited within an inch of their life with some of the most obnoxious sound design you've ever heard. Anyway, I don't want to make this about reality TV. My point is, all of that adds up to sitcoms being in this weird middle ground. Too associated with being cheap and old-fashioned to get the kind of prestige TV push that dramas can get, but requiring more money and time than reality TV shows. I'm not saying non-network live-action sitcoms don't get made anymore, they definitely do, but I don't think it's at the rate of their drama or especially their reality counterparts. There's a general sense that comedy is just less valuable in Hollywood these days. You see it in films where studio comedies have become more and more rare in the last 10 years, and I think you're seeing it in TV too, where a show like The Bear can win an Emmy for Best Comedy over, actual comedies. Now that's nothing against The Bear, which is overall a show I like a lot, but it seems like over the past decade or so, half-hour-ish shows like Louie, Master of None, and Fleabag would win comedy awards despite being dramedies that often took themselves very seriously. There seems to be this idea that by having these more dramatic elements, they were inherently superior to shows that were just putting the laughs first. And that's just not really a premise I agree with. Don't get me wrong, I don't dislike most of those shows, some of them I think are even great. But the idea that they're better just because they take these more serious turns rings pretty false to me. And if I'm being honest, I would take 30 Rock over basically all of them. I think you see the contemporary sitcom really struggle with this new expectation that they're supposed to be shows with deep themes and a lot more to say. One of the biggest sitcom success stories of the last 5 years or so was Ted Lasso, a high-concept workplace comedy based on a TV commercial that was initially showrun by Bill Lawrence, the creator of Scrubs. Ted Lasso is an interesting case of a show that seemed to be a victim of its own success. While, like Scrubs, it was a show that definitely wore its heart on its sleeve, Season 1 is still very much a joke-driven sitcom. Its ridiculous premise, where an American football coach is hired to lead a soccer team in the UK despite knowing almost nothing about that football, lent itself to comedy really easily. But as the show went along, and its introspective and heartfelt elements got praised endlessly with think pieces and articles, it started to take itself more and more seriously. The showrunner Bill Lawrence stepped down, they de-emphasized the jokes to some extent, and left us with some very meandering and often self-serious television. I know many will disagree, but I don't think the version of Ted Lasso we ended up getting is the best possible version of it. Now, to be fair, I also understand why more traditional sitcoms have been having a harder time getting traction like they used to, even ones not aimed at an older audience. Most of these shows were, at least in part, beloved because they honed in on relatable aspects of life in creative and funny ways. Family, the workplace, the world of dating, all these everyday things that shows from The Dick Van Dyke Show to The Office could find comedy in. Now though, the relatable everyday issues and conflicts that they drew from are the exact kind of things that really lend themselves to short-form comedy videos, curated by an algorithm to be sure that the person watching them will probably find it relatable. All those videos of like the same person talking to themselves while playing 3 different people, I think to some extent have kind of eaten the sitcom's lunch. Maybe I should have looked this up, but is there like a genre name for those? Anyway, I have nothing against them, like I get the appeal. I'm me, so of course I'd prefer a great episode of Frasier Season 2 over just about every TikTok on earth, but I understand most people my age and younger don't feel that way. And I get how videos like this can fulfill the same functions that sitcoms may be used to. It's also not helped by the fact that whatever else I could say about TikTok, these front-facing camera comedy videos are usually shot by regular people in their actual homes. Whereas the network sitcom in the HD era has just become more and more garish looking. Actors with pounds of makeup, overly clean and new looking clothes, and like sterile sets. Like obviously an old show like Cheers didn't look realistic exactly, in many ways it resembled a stage set, but it was recognizably human, like that set felt lived in. The people in it looked like normal people who had lived lives for the most part, and not TV stars. That is not what you see in most network sitcoms anymore. These shows so often claim to really want to be about family or whatever, when at this point there's just this almost strange, uncanny valley effect to them. They don't look like life as you or I recognize it in any meaningful way, so I understand how people could gravitate towards more actually relatable short-form videos instead. Now, the multicam sitcom in particular gets called outdated constantly, and I think this contemporary HD look is a huge part of that. I'll be honest, I love the multicam format, laugh track and all. Sure, they can go way too hard on adding in audience laughter, and yes, I don't think it's ever translated to HD particularly well. But I do think there's something special and uniquely television about it. It calls back to TV's roots of broadcasting live theater. I know the cynical line is always that they tell you when to laugh, and in bad sitcoms, it of course feels that way. But at its best, it really feels like you're in that live audience, communally enjoying these great performances together. And there's a particular rhythm to them when they're done well that just feels very unique. Now, I love many single cam shows like Parks and Rec too, but I feel like the mockumentary Bag of Tricks is actually just as limiting as the multicam ever was, maybe even more so. And I'm hoping that a new sitcom can come along and shake up the format of these things in the same way that the British Office felt like such a revelation when it was released. Because the mockumentary now feels as safe as the multicam did back then. I love sitcoms, and I hope they're here with us for a long time. But I understand why some find them to be a hokey and dated form. I don't agree, but it's clear that going back to the same old well and appealing to nostalgia and prequels just isn't a long-term solution for the genre. I don't think we'll ever have another sitcom in America that is as huge as Seinfeld was. The media landscape is just too fractured for that now. But I'd like to see more of them at least try to be as bold as that was in the early 90s, and not just settle for the familiar, because I don't think they can afford to anymore. The fact is, young people just don't vote nearly as much as their older counterparts, and that means their voices aren't nearly as heard. That's why I'm grateful for Tab for Democracy. They make it easier for us to help, and here's how that works. By using that link in the description and adding the Chrome extension for free, every time you open up a new tab, you'll see a few ads in the corner. Those ads generate revenue that go directly to supporting impactful organizations like Vote America. They're committed to strengthening American democracy by removing barriers for young people to vote, focusing on 3 key areas. Software development, they build tools that make navigating complicated voting processes super easy. Voter registration and mobilization, where they run huge campaigns to get more people registered and out to the polls. And impact litigation. They challenge states that pass voter suppression laws. In fact, they've already won major lawsuits in Kansas and Georgia. Voting obviously affects everything from the economy to climate policy and education, and Tab for Democracy gives you a simple way to help young voters. By downloading it, you're supporting Vote America's efforts to make sure every American has their voice heard. Plus, Tab for a Cause has a really proven track record. As of July 2024, they've raised over $1.8 million for charity. You can join today really simply by clicking that link in the description and making a difference with every new tab you open.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once, because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.